Hard to believe, but here we go with episode number 4 of the 2 Goal Lead podcast presented by BCHL Network. My name is Brian Wiebe. I'm the owner and editor-in-chief of BCHL Network. You can find the website online at bchlnetwork.ca. Happy to announce, actually, that we now have bchlnetwork.com as well. So, whichever you prefer is the one you can type in. Whichever you prefer is the one that you can bookmark. Whichever you prefer is the one that you can favorite, what have you. Very excited about that. Also, really excited about the response that we've received from the first 3 episodes of this 2 Goal Lead podcast presented by BCHL Network. From our guests, to the teams, to the BCHL, to fans, just thrilled with the response that we've received so far and really do appreciate it, really do want to thank you. One thing though that would make me grateful forever is if you could give us a subscribe, maybe a like. You can find the 2 Goal Lead podcast, of course, you found it here. It's posted at bchlnetwork.ca, but also available on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, Stitcher. Pretty much everywhere you get your podcasts, you can find the 2 Goal Lead podcast presented by BCHL Network. So if you could throw us a subscribe, really would appreciate it. Thank you so much. Now that I've got that out of the way, let's get to the guest on episode number 4. And he is a very special guest. I mean, they all are. All of our guests are special here on the 2 Goal Lead podcast. But this one is special because there's a couple of ties between Ian Wilson and myself. So Ian is the play-by-play broadcaster for the Coquitlam Express. That's awesome. Love having broadcasters. That's my background. I did color commentary for the Merritt Centennials for a number of years before moving into writing like I am for BCHL Network and creating the website. However, there is one other tie between Ian Wilson and myself. My full-time day job is as the program head and an instructor in the BCIT Radio Arts and Entertainment program. Now, BCIT is a polytechnic institute just outside of Vancouver. There's 5 different campuses across the Metro Vancouver region, and Ian just happens to be a second-year student in that Radio Arts and Entertainment program. So pretty cool to not only have the play-by-play voice of the Express join me here on the podcast, but also one of my very own students. So it is Ian Wilson. Ian, thanks so much for taking the time to join us here on the 2 Goal Lead podcast presented by BCHL Network.
No worries at all. Thank you for having me.
So the Express right now, you look at the standings, sort of lumped in with Alberni Valley, Chilliwack, Victoria in that middle of the Coastal Conference. What do you think the Express need to do to separate itself from the rest of that group going forward here?
I think the Express are a team that needs to continue to play to its identity. It's a team that early on in the season, we remember the first 3 home games, not a great start to the year, but then they went on the road trip to Powell River and just something clicked. They just became a team that really played together and played for each other. And I think that's a strong suit that they can continue to play to as the season goes along. Obviously, with the trade deadline come and gone, recently signing Ethan Rosenoff, which I think is fantastic for the locker room because that's a guy that worked his butt off since joining as an AP player, had the 3 games, scored twice. Now he's a full-time player, and that just gives everybody a bit of a boost. And now with Blake Setter coming in as well, too, and the trade deadline come and gone, players have something to play for because they want to play for each other. And now players can sit because there's no threat of being moved around. It's just people having the opportunity to stay in the lineup. But when they play together, they're a strong team. And with this logjam going on, they need to remember to take it one game at a time.
I'm glad that you brought up Rosenoff because I was going to ask you about him, the fact that he was on the reserve roster playing as an affiliate player, 2005 born forward, and then comes in as a regular rostered player now after the January 10th deadline. You talked about that hunger, that drive that he brings to the game. What else have you seen from him that you like as a player?
When I look at Ethan Rosenoff, I see a player that's not afraid to play and punch above his weight class. He looked really good in that loss on January 13th to Chilliwack, where first time stepping into the lineup as a full-time player, didn't end up getting on the score sheet in that game, but not afraid to go to the dirty areas of the ice. And even a couple of times you see him going up against and battling against like a player like Aaron Davidson, 6'9", and not looking out of place. He's fitting into the system. He's getting to the right areas, but he's not trying to force the issue and be something bigger than his role at this time. He wants to be a part of the system. Obviously, he wants to be able to get on the score sheet and score those goals. And he's proven that he has that ability. But what I like to see from a player is the ability to not try and stand out or play hero hockey and that kind of thing. And that's what I get out of Ethan Rosenoff.
Now, looking at your role as a play-by-play announcer, growing up, were there any sports announcers that you admired? And if so, why?
I think my first experience with sports announcing growing up was probably playing like NHL 98 on the Nintendo 64. And I can't remember who were the announcers that ended up voice tracking for that game specifically, but that's probably one of my earliest like wow moments. And then obviously the Johns in Vancouver, Garrett and Shorty, were a huge influence for me, as we would always, when I was a little kid, we'd go over to family friends' houses and our parents would play cards. And if there was a Canucks game on, everybody would be watching the game in the living room. And so that was always a big one. Doc Emmerich as well. Always loved his work throughout growing up, and just because originally I wasn't going to be a play-by-play announcer and working in sports broadcast. That was kind of a shift that I went through as I was taking my undergrad education at UFE. And then also I'd say Matt Devlin with the Toronto Raptors.
I think that it was Jim Hewson would have been doing play-by-play probably on that NHL 98 would just be my guess in that case. James Cybulski would have come later for sure. Mm-hmm. Now, you've got a lot of experience as a commentator for a variety of sports. Is there one that stands out as your favorite to call?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I would have to say lacrosse. Box lacrosse might be my favorite. I've had the honor to do the Arena Lacrosse League West Division since they've come out to the Langley Event Center, expanding from just having the Eastern Conference out in Ontario. And I am baffled as to why that sport has not taken on more than it has. I like to look at it, box lacrosse, as like this weird demon love child between hockey and basketball, where it's got the best of both worlds. It's got the over and back rules, the backcourt, all these things like basketball and the style of play of pick and rolls and things like that. But it still has the rock'em sock'em style of physical play, cross checks, stick checks, and scoring variety and structure, like players at the point, players in front, one-timers of hockey. And having the chance to call that game, it's fast-paced. You have to be quick on your feet with saying what everything's happening if you want to get it across to the viewer, because what happens in hockey, players skating, striding have a little bit more time. But in lacrosse, these players are planted on solid ground. It's just boom, 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 boom. So it's been a whole lot of fun.
So is the fast pace of that sport the reason why it might be your favorite to call?
I think so. I really like it when I'm in a flow and things are just able to roll off the tongue back to back to back. And when you complete a really long sequence of just fast-paced play where every second it's something different that you have to say and be able to describe, it really kind of challenges me as a commentator to get that out for the people viewing in.
Is there a sport that you've yet to call that you'd like to?
That I've yet to call? I would say I would maybe put baseball on that list, or wrestling. Those two are ones that I've always had an interest to call, but never had the opportunity to come by.
Professional wrestling or amateur wrestling?
A little bit of both, because I did a little bit of amateur wrestling when I was in high school, and so I've always had an appreciation for that as well. But I also grew up a WWE fan.
As an athlete, you did some amateur wrestling, or called amateur wrestling in high school?
As an athlete.
Oh, okay. All right. So wrestling could be broken into the two categories. You'd be happy with doing either one of those or both. Okay.
I'd be happy with doing either.
You had the opportunity last fall to call games for the World U17 Championship here in Langley and in Delta. What was that experience like for you?
Incredible. I can't say enough good things about that crew with 10 Feet Sports Entertainment at the Langley Event Center. I've had the chance to work with them ever since starting up with the Arena Lacrosse League, and my first ever international event, working play-by-play, and I think a really good learning experience with some of the feedback that I was able to get, and the kudos as well too. Hockey Canada seemed pretty impressed with my work, and to be able to have another thing that I can send to folks that I know and love that want to tune in and watch stuff. Because typically with most of the stuff that I do, a lot of it's with Hockey TV, and so not a lot of people have Hockey TV accounts per se unless they're specifically invested in that product. So with all of those games being available for free on the Hockey Canada website, it was great to be able to have more family and friends tune in. But for me with that event, I think one of my favorite parts of it had to be working with the foreign teams as well too, and getting their pronunciations down and making sure that they were correct too, because nothing grinds my gears more than listening to a player's name be consistently mispronounced. And so quite often all it is just walking up to that player and saying, how do you say your name? And they're like, oh, no, it's good. No. How do you say your name? How do you want it to be said? I don't care how people have been saying it for the last however many years of your career. How do you say it? And you'd be surprised.
So if you had the opportunity to call any sporting event in the world, what would it be?
Any sporting event in the world? Oh, it would either have to be the World Junior Hockey Championships. If we go into the professional wrestling side, being a commentator for WrestleMania would be insane. And honestly, for me, that would either be play-by-play or PA, because I also my original experience in sports was PA announcing for the UFE Cascades. That's how I got into this crazy world of sports broadcast. And so I would be happy to do either. Either WrestleMania, the World Junior Hockey Championships, or potentially, if I'm going into the world of esports, I would love to be a part of, say, like Intel Extreme Masters Katowice with Counter-Strike Global Offensive. That event is possibly one of the craziest sporting environments I've ever seen in my life. A full-on football stadium over in Europe just filled with people, and it's like a soccer style of atmosphere, but even more hectic, I would say. So being a part of something like that would be incredible, to be in that atmosphere.
For someone who wants to try their hand in doing play-by-play, what's the best way for someone to get started?
Reaching out to your local teams, because there's a lot of instances where local teams maybe only have one commentator, and that commentator is not superhuman. They may need a night off, or they may get sick, or things may come up. And even in my case, there's times where because I work with so many different teams, sometimes things overlap and then things can slip through the cracks. So if you're interested in getting your chops cut in this industry, just approach your local teams. Or in the case of myself, a lot of my opportunities too came through BCIT and being in the radio arts and entertainment program. That's how I got involved with my first official sports broadcast commentary full-time position. We're working with the Richmond Sockeyes. Was yourself, as you have many hats, the program head there, sending out emails with those different opportunities. But even if you don't want to do that as like a full-time thing or seek that as a career, and you just want the opportunity, just approach your teams. I think a lot of times they're very approachable and willing to give people the chance to kind of live that dream or get that experience on their resume.
So this is your first season calling games in the BC Hockey League. You talked about BCIT. You're set to graduate in June. What's your plan for your career going forward after you graduate?
If only I knew a more specific answer to that. But I think that's nice too, in the sense that it's a little bit open-ended. Originally, my career goals were to do broadcast meteorology. I went to UFE for an undergrad degree before coming to BCIT, and I was thinking to go to UBC to do meteorology as a postgrad diploma. But then that program ended up having its own issues and didn't exist at the time that I went to register for it. So I had to pivot, and I was like, what do I really value and what do I experience? And that was my sports broadcasting, both PA and play-by-play, through those opportunities. So I came to BCIT, and now things have shifted to looking at wanting to be in the radio industry in some regard, whether that's full-time play-by-play, or I would honestly be very happy as well too with all the connections and the stuff that I do right now, being able to pair that with some sort of, whether it's on air, whether it being like traditional like disc jockey and playing music, or sports and news radio, and then being able to pair that with in the evenings doing PA and play-by-play for various local teams and initiatives. I think that would also be a lot of fun. But really, I think it's going to come down to where the cards fall and where the opportunities lie. And I have no idea what is going to unfold in the next 4 months.
So to wrap things up here, getting back to the Express, the club lost a close 7-game series against Chilliwack in the first round of the playoffs last year, getting closer and closer to the playoffs now. You alluded to it a little bit with the question that I asked earlier, and the fact that the Express, to separate itself from that other three teams in the Coastal Conference to play its game. But when you look at playoff tested, there are some veteran players on this Express squad that went through that 7-game loss against the Chilliwack Chiefs. Do you think that the Express, as it's built right now, is set up for that playoff success?
I do. I think that the moves that they've made really kind of show that this roster is ready. It's full of a lot of veterans. And when you talk about those veterans, one of the names that jumps off of the page for me is Luke Vardy. Luke Vardy was an absolute thorn in the side of Chilliwack last year. And I know this because I got the chance to call a couple of those games of that series for the Chilliwack Chiefs, filling in for Brandon Astle. And what a series it was. Adam Manji's been playing fantastic this year, and to see him continue to develop as a player and just becoming an even better goaltender has been wonderful to see. And bringing in even more leadership with a guy like Blake Setter and with Jake Manfrey and Ian Devlin, these players set to come off the IR within the next few weeks. Hopefully it's gonna be a good time, I think, to be an Express fan coming on to the playoffs. They've got lots of depth. I mean, when you've got a line like Garzone, McHardy, and Alexander slotted in on the roster as like the third line, and I use air quotations when I say that. Obviously, people not going to see that on the audio podcast, but I use air quotations and emphasis when I say that, because this is a team where on any given night, one of those four lines could be the first line and be playing the most minutes, because with Patrick Sexton and company, if a line is playing well, they're not going to disregard or unreward that line for sticking to the game plan and playing with tenacity. So seeing this team continue to play together and roll the four lines and build that identity going forward even stronger, I think they're set. I think it's going to be a good time come the playoffs.
Great stuff, Ian. Hey, thanks so much for joining us here on the 2 Goal Lead podcast presented by BCHL Network. Really appreciate you taking the time.
No worries. Thank you again for having me.
Fantastic conversation with Ian Wilson, the play-by-play voice of the Coquitlam Express in the BC Hockey League's Coastal Conference. Also want to mention that the BCHL definitely gets a tip of the cap for what it did during the 60th anniversary All-Star Weekend. Just an outstanding event in Penticton. The V's outstanding hosts for the event, the city of Penticton. I wasn't able to make it to the Okanagan to watch the festivities, but saw on Hockey TV, saw lots of coverage on social media. Overall, looked like it's just a fantastic time for the alumni, for players, for special guests, for the teams, like just a fantastic job. So I have to take my hat off to everybody in the BCHL office for the wonderful, wonderful job that they did at the 60th anniversary All-Star event. Of course, 60th anniversary isn't in fact this season, but they had to shelve their plans because of what was happening with the pandemic. And so this was the year that they were actually able to put on these events in a safe environment, and they knocked it out of the park. It was fantastic. So great job to everyone at the BCHL office and all the teams and all the players and all the alumni and all the fans that were involved in that. I do want to remind you that there's a few places that you can find the 2 Goal Lead podcast presented by BCHL Network: Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, Stitcher. You can find all of those with links at bchlnetwork.ca, bchlnetwork.com. And that will do it for this episode number 4 of the 2 Goal Lead podcast presented by BCHL Network. I sincerely thank you for tuning in, sincerely thank you for listening along, and encourage you to tune in for our next episode because it features a member of the Cowichan Valley Capitals. It's going to be a great episode of the podcast. Thanks so much again for listening, and I will talk to you then.